So some quick math. I've probably preached about 450 sermons here. And our deacon rep to the endowment board said that my second one was the best. So I feel a need to apologize for you all having to endure the other 448 since then. Our second scripture lesson today is from Genesis 25, verses 7 to 11. This is the length of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. After the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahai-roi. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Sometimes I forget that most people don't deal with death as much as I do. It's a pretty distinctive part of the pastoral vocation. It's one of those things that bonds you with other ministers, whether they're part of your tradition or theological outlook or not. Dealing with death regularly gives you a particular perspective on life. When anybody in our congregation dies, I meet with the family to talk about the life of the individual. Even if I knew the person very well in life, I learn something from children, a spouse, siblings, something about their soul and their loves. And while every person, their story is unique, there are some consistent themes that show up in these conversations. One I hear pretty frequently is from children who are really appreciative of the unconditional love of their parent who has died, but who are also equally grateful for the boundaries and discipline that that parent provided. Usually that comment is followed by a story of a time when the child needed that boundary or discipline so that they were prevented from further trouble later in life. Another thing that comes up a lot is the small things that the deceased person did in life. The note that was put into the lunch bag on school mornings. The homemade Halloween costumes each year. The tradition around setting up the Christmas tree. And then usually there are stories of what this person did for others. How their life helped in their community with their time, their resources, their money, anonymously paying the bills for someone who was down on their luck, mentoring a young person who they knew had a very chaotic life in their own home, serving in some sort of way in the community that stood up for those on the margins. If these loved ones talk about the person's career or the education they attained, or the wealth that they accumulated, or the power that they had, almost always it's described in the way they used their position to enhance the lives of others. They don't talk about the policy manuals that they rewrote, or the quarterly earnings goals that they met. They don't talk about who they beat out for that promotion with the company, or the properties and vehicles and luxury vacations that they could afford. It's almost as if by nature, or maybe it's social pressure, if so good, it's a good social pressure, these loved ones embody in these conversations the words of Jesus. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. Instead, they focus these children, these siblings, these spouses, on the treasures in heaven that this person laid up by living out the way of joy and generosity, gentleness, kindness, patience, and love. So today we are in the funeral planning meeting for Abraham with Ishmael and Isaac as they prepare to lay their father to rest. And Abraham is a complicated father to recall, as you can remember if you've been with us with Abraham over the summer. Isaac shares how frequently Daddy used to talk about hearing that call in his hometown and the indescribable pull on him to go. He would grow misty as he described the nearness of that voice, the electricity of the faith that drove him on the journey. But then Isaac falters as he tells the story of that father-son camping trip up Mount Moriah, where he saw a different face of his father, saved as he was by the ram in the thicket. Their relationship was never quite the same after that. And Ishmael, too, the older boy, Hagar's son, the product of Sarah and Abraham's effort to bring the promise to fulfillment on their own. He knew his father's love and his mother's enduring protection, but he also grew up in a home always knowing he was second class. Mama Sarah never wanted him around. And then the demand of Daddy to send he and his mother into the wilderness. And yet it was the same God who spoke to his dad, who spoke to his mom Hagar there, promising to provide and protect them. It's complicated. He's been provided for by this same God who first spoke to his father, even though he wasn't the son of the promise. So he sits in this funeral meeting conflicted. Love and neglect, despair and provision. And yet we read at the end, when his days are complete, Abraham reaches a good old age, and he is gathered to his people. And the two brothers, with all their memories, join together to lay their father to rest. Just east of Mamre, where God first appeared with the promise of pregnancy. Buried next to his faithful and long-suffering and sometimes manipulative wife, Sarah. Two faithful and flawed people side by side, buried by two sons, also faithful and flawed. And so their legacy is based on what those who come after them choose to remember about them. And Israel tells a complicated story of Abraham. It continues through Isaac, but Ishmael is included here in the funeral plans and the burial rites. Because we want Abraham to be remembered as a man of faith who stepped out in trust with his God, but who often failed along the journey. But that in that faith and in that failure, God was persistently present and provided for and saved Abraham and provided for and saved those Abraham couldn't or wouldn't. The legacy of Abraham is really not his own legacy then. It's the legacy of the calling and providing and redeeming God. And that legacy invites us to ask, what is the legacy that we hope those after us might remember of us? Some members of our church learned about Abraham's legacy, that their lives could be remembered as a testimony to the God who calls and provides and redeems, a God who brings together what we tear apart. And so in trust, they left a part of what their life's work was for to the ongoing mission of our congregation, specifically toward the work of God in caring for others through our endowment. Evidence of that legacy you can see today in the organizations from 2024 and 2025 who we have been able to support in their work both in our city and beyond. And it's important to note that most of these organizations are not directly part of our life together at Raleigh Court Presbyterian Church. Some of them are explicitly Christian in their efforts. Some are humanitarian with no specific theological orientation. Some are ecumenical or interfaith in their efforts. The legacy of these members and the work of our mission endowment, then, is not to promote ourselves, the mixture of faith and failure that we are, but to participate in the healing and in the reconciliation of the world. Now, we do that in the name of Jesus Christ, but we look to partner with anyone who shares in common cause. And that is, in a way in which we follow the legacy of Abraham. Isaac and Ishmael, patrons of two nations, progenitors of three of the world's main religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They come together to bury their father. Abraham's legacy is in their coexistence and mutual life. Abraham invites from us, then, this same kind of sharing and collaboration. And so his legacy asks of us, what legacy do we wish to leave? What will be said or remembered of us if we're remembered at all? What will be said by those we met along the way? There was a group of sixth grade students, and they went on a field trip with their teacher. They were exploring different religions of the world throughout their hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They visited a Hindu temple, and there they learned of the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita. They saw the statues and the paintings of the gods there. They learned about the wheel of samsara. Then they went to a Jewish synagogue. They heard the shofar and saw the scrolls. They learned about the Passover and the keeping of Shabbat, Promised Land, and Jerusalem. And then they went to visit the Shadyside Presbyterian Church, where they would meet with the Reverend Austin Shelley, who was tasked with teaching them about the Christian religion. To share an entire faith tradition with 12-year-olds in 1 hour. Recognizing that for some, this would be the only thing they would ever hear about the Christian faith. What was said to them in that space would be the legacy of Jesus that they might only ever know. You would sign up for that, right? To lead that? Reverend Shelley took him into the sanctuary. And in the sanctuary at the Shadyside Church, in the chancel, is a large and beautiful mosaic of Jesus, his arms outstretched in a posture of resurrection. And she talked to them about Jesus, his origin as a Jewish teacher, his confrontation with the Roman authorities and with his own religious leaders. She told them about his death on a cross, because his way of love and mercy and forgiveness threatened those who held the positions of power and who controlled the masses by the ways of fear. And then she talked about resurrection and how in rising from the dead, Jesus conquered anything you could conjure or believe was possible to separate you from the love of God. In that resurrection is a love that can overcome doubt and fear and even death itself. And that Christians believe that we, filled with that love, are to share that love with every other person, whether they are or ever become Christians themselves. Then she pointed their attention to the mosaic. You'll notice that each tile in the mosaic is different. They're a different size, a different shape, slightly different colors. I like to imagine, Reverend Shelley said, that each of those tiles represents one of us, a different person on this earth with whatever makes us distinct, our size, our shape, our color, our background. But that somehow, in the way of Jesus, we can be put together into something beautiful, living together in the way of justice and peace. Go ahead up into the chancel. Put your hands on the tiles, touch them. See if there's one there that you believe represents you. If it's not evident at this point, Reverend Shelley was an art teacher before she was a pastor. The children went up into the chancel. They touched the tiles. They looked at which one might be for them. Now, being respectful students with a high-class educator, a flurry of thank you notes came in from the class to the church office the following week. They thanked the pastor for her speech. Some of them shared something that they learned. A couple of them said they had never heard Christianity described that way before in their experience, but they were grateful. But there was one note that was unsigned. It was anonymous. And the words were simple. Dear Reverend Shelley, thank you. My family is Muslim, and we didn't have a chance to visit a mosque on our field trip. But you told us that one of the stars of Abraham was for me. I chose a red tile.